We're here today with Mr. Bass Reeves, a famous African American cowboy. Now, many people don't realize that there were blacks back during the Western days. And we see all the movies and we never see them. So we have an authentic person right here with us today, Mr. Bill Bass. I just messed all of that up, didn't I? Let me start
You
all
said
of
you
that.
could edit it. Go ahead.
I get
Am
it.
I supposed to do that part?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just do that and then you go back into it.
All
So
right.
tell me when, countdown.
And go.
So much history is lost on us today. It would be a good idea to occasionally highlight an African American who made a difference in this country. You might start by introducing your viewers to Bass Reeves, the lawman. There are many sources with expanded information about Bass Reeves in books and articles, and there is an ongoing debate as to whether or not the inspiration for the Lone Ranger is based on Bass Reeves. Nevertheless, Reeves was a real, well known deputy marshal and lawman.
So, Mr. Reeves, tell us a little bit about yourself. How you, first of all, when you were born, where you were born, and tell us a little bit about your early life.
Well, I was born in 1838 in Crawford County, Arkansas. And of course, during that time, uh, slaves were still occupying that part of the United States until about 1860, 61, when the state, Arkansas itself, seceded from the United States. I had an owner by it with the last name of Reeves, William Reeves. He owned me, my mother, and several other slaves. So when the war broke out, he actually took myself, my family, with him. And I acted as a servant, concierge, whatever you want to call it, but I actually fought alongside him with my gun. So I fought on the Confederate side.
So, fought on the Confederate side. Was that by choice, or was that just what you knew to do? You were protecting the land of the person that had given you his name.
Well, actually, we took the name after the Emancipation Proclamation. Everybody had to have a first name and a last name. So that was the only name I was familiar with. The question was, did I fight by choice or did I fight because I was a slave? That's all debatable. All I knew was that plantation I lived on, I had hunt, fish, and gathered up food for the slave owners. So when it was time to go to war, we went to war.
Okay. So, every cowboy has a horse. Tell us a little bit about your horse.
I had this large stud white horse. This horse would ride as long as I would ride. He would eat when I ate. He would do anything I say do. This was one heck of a horse.
So, when you say it was one heck of a horse, what color was it? What type of horse was it? Was it a stallion, bronco?
Again, he was a white horse, a thoroughbred,
Mm-hmm.
and a stallion.
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 So stallions mean that they have a longer mane, or what? What? Tell me, what's the difference between a
Stallion
stallion
means
and
that
a
he could
regular?
breed other horses.
Oh, they can breed other
Yes.
horses. Okay. All right. So was it something prestigious to have a stallion back in those days?
No, it wasn't. It's the one I caught, the one I trained, and the one that would service me back.
Okay. So, uh, what if what did being a slave add to your life or take away from your life?
Because it was an experience, it added to my life. Did it take away anything from me? Well, being a captive and being owned by someone, yes, it took away from
So, well, I would think that being a slave would have made you hardened. Would have hardened you maybe to some men. But as a lawman, was you believe you were a fair man?
me. I was a fair man, a compassionate man, but I had a job to do. And with that job came responsibility. And with that job came an integrity. And with that job, which very few people of color had, it made me want to do my best at what I did.
So, job. When you say job, what was that job?
Well, Judge Parker appointed me. He was known as a hanging judge.
Hmm.
He appointed me, and he said, "These are your warrants. Go find them, bring them in, and I'll take care of them from there."
So you essentially like one of the, I guess they call them back in the days, Texas Ranger type person.
No, sir. U.S. Deputy Marshal. He had authority over a certain area,
Hmm. So,
not a particular state. Oklahoma at the time was not a state in the Union, and neither were only parts of Arkansas at the time was part of the state. So my responsibility for parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and a little bit of Texas.
now, do you feel like that it was that you were a part of uh, going out and capturing bad guys, but you think they all received fair trials?
Again, the trial part was left up to Judge Parker. My job was to go out and bring them in.
So there was a lot of celebrations during that time. When they do it, they had what, hanging parties?
I attended very few of those. I brought them in. Judge Parker took care of the rest of it.
So that means you bringing the groceries, but you're not eating the dinner.
It's about the size.
That's
of it.
about the size of it. All right. Well, is there? It seems like when you describe your horse and everything that you did, sounds like a story of Lone Ranger. Did you travel with the Indian, or is that just a myth?
No, it's not a myth. I had a companion who was Native American. And this guy, well, I lived with the Native Americans, what they call the five civilized tribes. And these five civilized tribes were the individuals that could actually own slaves. They made us part of their families. We were not like slaves, but they made us part of their families. Now, I did have a companion that rode with me. He would help me, and he actually showed me how to read trails. So he was more of a companion, a friend, and a confidant.
Was he Indian?
He was Native American, yes.
Well, at that point, they said back then they said Indian. So
Okay.
I'm being politically correct for that period. But right now, we would call him Native American.
Okay.
But was he treated very fairly? Because I believe his name, which is maybe fiction or not, I don't know if it's fact, but I think his name was something that he wouldn't be proud of. Tonto.
The way I have this and the way it's interpreted to me, Tonto meant stupid or fool. Now, whether he liked being called that, I don't know. He may not have a grasp of the Spanish language, but Tonto meant stupid or fool.
Were you allowed to arrest white men?
I'd arrest anybody Judge Parker gave me a warrant for.
Wow. Did those? I'm sure those robbers or bank robbers or all the people you're looking for didn't really appreciate that. But did you have any issues because you were black?
I had some.
Mm-hmm.
But, after a few years, I spent 32 years, I've been the Deputy U.S. Marshal, but after a few years, the name got around. If Bass Reeves was on your trail, either give up or kill yourself.
Wow. Now, with all of that law, serving warrants, were you have time to have a family?
Yes, most important part of my life. One of the reasons I became a Deputy U.S. Marshal, and I'll explain that to you. Record show I had 5 girls and 5 boys, a total of 10, but there were one other, so there was a total of 11. It takes a lot to feed those children. And I had a farm, I owned land, which was rare for a man of color or a black man to own land or own property. When Judge Parker asked me about working for him as U.S. Deputy Marshal, this is what he said. You can have all the bounty and any of the rewards. And that turned out to be a pretty lucrative job. If you count over the years, I probably brought in 3,000 wanted persons.
Wow, 3,000 wanted persons. So, is there anything else that we need to know? After a lawman, what kind of retirement, or were you killed at a young age? What happened to Bass Reeves?
Well, very, very seldom does a lawman change when he retires or get to the point to where he retired. After Oklahoma became a state, what they did was they turned everything over to the city to do their own policing, or the state in some cases. Some cases they didn't have a state police department till later on, but usually the city would take over, or they would elect a sheriff to take over. So after that, the U.S. Deputy Marshal, they went out and hunted the bad guys. We're just about gone. So I went to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and worked up there as a patrol officer.
Okay, and in the end, where you ended up buried, I'm sure you would know that. But for people here, we understand that this is a reenactment, but ultimately, where did he end up buried?
Bass Reeves actually died in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
Bass Reeves had a disease that they called it at the time Bright's disease. And that actually took him. They buried me in a cemetery in Muskogee, Oklahoma. There's no marker there. So if you went to the cemetery in Muskogee, Oklahoma, you probably wouldn't find my marked grave.
Well, with all the knowledge that we know now, why haven't we put a marker there?
Debatable issue. However, there is a statue of Bass Reeves in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. All right then.
And one in Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Then what ultimately would you tell your children about Bass Reeves and the effect that he had on African American history?
As you may or may not know, as a slave, I didn't have much education. In fact, I never learned to read or to write. But there was several things that I learned in order to survive. I learned how to hunt, to bring meat to the table. I learned how to take care of my family by being a property owner. I lived with the Native American for several years. I was able to speak 4 of their languages. When they gave me a warrant to go out and catch the guy that was on that warrant, couldn't read his name. So I had someone to tell me his name, describe him the best I could. So when I took that warrant out, I had it memorized on what this person looked like, who this person is. I called him by name and took him in. So you don't have to be totally literate to be able to take care of your family or yourself.
Okay, so the Lone Ranger. It has been widely suspected that your life was based on the Lone Ranger. What are your feelings about that?
I feel like they will never forget me, especially in certain age group. They'll never forget me. However, history should show that the person that portrayed Lone Ranger took most of his exploits from a guy named Bass Reeves.
So you have a few weapons over there. Let's do something with some of the guns. Just do some talk about the guns and do some stuff with them.
You got to cut that part. One of the things I always found out as a hunter, and that's just what I was because I hunt people, and it was almost like hunting for game to eat, except that in this game we shoot back. And I found it very advantageous for me to carry at least 2 weapons. I had 2 .45 Colts that I wore, and I carried them each on the side of my saddle horn on my saddle. And then I always carried a concealed weapon on the inside, and then one of the 45s I wore on the side. I went out to arrest that guy. He knew I was coming, so myself and my Indian companion set up on the trail that they usually come across, and we waited, and we waited. Finally, they showed up. So we came out of concealment, and I said, "This is Bass Reeves, and I have a warrant for your arrest." It spooked him. He pulled his gun, and he started shooting.
How did you pull your gun?
Fast, quick,
Well, let's pull it.
shot him in the heart.
Well, pull it.
Huh? Well, I used mine.
Pull it.
Used a sidearm that was on the host, that was on the saddle.
Okay, and you. Oh,
And I can either use the right hand or the left hand, or if I have to, use both hands.
what about your rifle?
The rifle was for those that I had to go the distance to find them. And I had a Henry 870, one of the best lever action rifles that they made at the time.
Show me how they cock it.
How they cock it, or
How
how
you
Bass
cock
Reeves did.
How Bass Reeves
You
did.
get into a far fight, you want to stop them,